The 19-year-old peasant girl who had turned the tide of the 100 Years' War now sat chained to a wooden block in an English fortress, guarded by the very soldiers whose armies she had broken. The woman who had crowned a king of France was now a prize of war, purchased for 10,000 livres. Her captors did not want her ransom. They wanted her erased. When Burgundian soldiers dragged Joan of Arc from her horse at Compiègne on May 23, 1430, they held the most valuable prisoner in Europe. By winter, she had been sold to the English and imprisoned in the castle of Bouvruel in Rouen, the nerve center of English-occupied France. Her cell was not in a church prison, as canon law demanded for a heretic. It was in a military dungeon. The stage was not set for a trial, but for an extermination. This is the story of those final months. A story of a legal proceeding designed to fail, of imprisonment meant to break, and of a fire lit not just to kill a girl, but to burn the very hope she had ignited in a nation. On January 3, 1431, the charges were formally issued. Joan would stand trial in an ecclesiastical court. But this court was a puppet show. It was headed by Pierre Cauchon, the Bishop of Beauvais, a French cleric whose lands were controlled by the English, and whose ambition was tied to their favor. His panel of 42 assessors were not impartial judges. They were clerics living under English occupation or loyal to the Anglo-Burgundian cause. The charges were a trap woven from scripture and prejudice, heresy for claiming direct divine visions, cross-dressing for wearing male military attire, and disobedience for refusing to submit her voices to the authority of the church militant, Cauchon's church. The English needed her victories to be declared the work of the devil. If Joan was a heretic, then the king she crowned, Charles VII, was a king ordained by witchcraft, and his claim to the throne was illegitimate. The interrogations began on February 21 in the chapel of the castle. Joan, alone before a sea of learned men, showed a mind that stunned them. They tried to ensnare her with theological puzzles. The most famous trap: are you in a state of grace? To say yes was heresy. No one could be certain of God's grace. To say no was to admit her mission was a fraud. Joan's answer sliced through the snare: if I am not, may God put me there; if I am, may God keep me there. Even her enemies noted the brilliance of her reply. For weeks, they hammered at her about her voices, her clothes, her refusal to swear an unconditional oath. She parried, she clarified, she insisted she would only answer for her own faith, not betray the king. The original 70 charges were boiled down to 12. But the outcome was never in doubt. As one dissenting cleric, Nicolas de Houppeville, protested, only to be thrown into prison himself, this was not an inquest for truth, but a construction for condemnation. While the trial played out in the chapel, Joan's real torture was her imprisonment. Canon law was clear: a woman accused of heresy must be held in an ecclesiastical prison, under the guard of nuns, to protect her and ensure a fair trial. Joan was held in a secular, military tower. She was guarded day and night by 5 rough English soldiers, 3 in her cell, 2 outside the door. She was kept in iron shackles, chained at times by the ankles to a heavy wooden block. The purpose was psychological and physical warfare. The guards taunted her, threatened her, and stole what little comfort she had. Witnesses from the later nullification trial testified that a great English lord attempted to assault her. This context is crucial. It explains her stubborn, life-or-death insistence on wearing men's clothing. The judges condemned her attire as an abomination. But for Joan, the tightly laced hose, doublet, and short tunic of a soldier were a practical suit of armor. A dress in that cell, surrounded by hostile men, was an invitation to violation. She pleaded this point repeatedly: it was more proper and safe. The judges dismissed it. They wanted her in a dress, vulnerable and feminine, because it would visually undo the warrior maiden who had terrified them on the battlefield. When she fell gravely ill, possibly from food poisoning, she begged for confession and the Eucharist, fearing she would die. It was denied. The Earl of Warwick, the English commander, intervened, not out of mercy, but because their expensive political asset could not die of sickness. She had to die their way, by their decree. On May 24th, after months of this relentless pressure, Joan was taken to the cemetery of Saint-Ouen. A platform was built. A crowd gathered. There, for the first time, she was shown the instruments of her death, the stake and the faggots. The executioner's cart stood ready. The full, visceral terror of burning was placed before her. Faced with this immediate horror, isolated, sick, and abandoned by the French king she had saved, the 19-year-old girl broke. She agreed to sign a document of abjuration, a confusing, long text read aloud to her, in which she renounced her voices and her clothes, and swore obedience to the church. In exchange, her sentence was commuted from death to life imprisonment. She was then forced to put on a woman's dress. For the English in Cauchon, this was a supreme victory. They had not just convicted the heresy, they had gotten the living symbol to publicly deny it herself. The legend of the maid was shattered. But it lasted only 3 days. What happened next is critical. The official record states Joan voluntarily returned to men's clothing, telling her guards her voices had reprimanded her for her cowardly denial. However, testimony from the 1456 rehabilitation trial tells a darker, more plausible story. Witnesses stated the English guards, under orders, removed her woman's dress during the night and left her nothing but her old male attire. When she put it on to leave her cell, they pounced. Whether by deliberate sabotage or a genuine crisis of faith, the result was the same. On May 28th, Cauchon and his judges visited her cell and found her in men's clothes. She was declared a relapsed heretic. Under Canon law, a relapsed heretic who had rejected a chance for mercy was irredeemable. The sentence was final, death. On the morning of May 30th, 1431, she was allowed a final confession and communion, a small mercy that underscored the hypocrisy of the entire process. She was then led to the Vieux Marché, the old marketplace of Rouen. The procedure was a sham. She should have been formally handed over to the secular authority, the bailiff of Rouen, for sentencing, to maintain the church's fiction that it did not shed blood. Instead, an English soldier simply read the condemnation and ordered the execution to proceed. They couldn't wait. Tied to a tall plastered pillar, Joan asked for a cross. An English soldier, moved by pity, fashioned a small one from 2 sticks. She kissed it and tucked it into her bosom. A processional crucifix was fetched from a nearby church and held before her eyes as the flames were lit. Witnesses reported she cried out repeatedly, "Jesus! Jesus," as the smoke and fire engulfed her. Her last audible word was the name of her God. The executioner, Geoffrey Therridge, later said he feared for his soul, for he had burned a saint. The political erasure was thorough. The fire was stoked until her body was carbonized. The ashes were gathered and thrown into the Seine River so no relic could remain. The English believed they had killed not just a person, but an idea. They were wrong. They had immortalized it. The victory they bought for 10,000 livres was fleeting. Within 2 years, the moral momentum had shifted. Charles VII, now secure, began to quietly advocate for a retrial to cleanse his own coronation of the stain of heresy. In 1456, a nullification trial, presided over by the Pope, heard 115 witnesses. They systematically dismantled Cauchon's trial, exposing its illegalities, its coercion, and its profound bias. Joan was posthumously exonerated. Centuries later, in 1920, the Catholic Church completed its reversal, canonizing her as Saint Joan of Arc. The heretic became a patron saint of France. Her trial was never about theology. It was a political murder dressed in clerical vestments. Every element, the illegal prison, the loaded questions, the stolen dress, the rushed execution, was designed not to discover the truth, but to produce a specific, useful corpse. They sought to replace the living symbol of French resistance with a new symbol, the charred remains of a condemned witch. But in that failure lies her enduring power. They tried to use the mechanics of law and the spectacle of punishment to break a truth too powerful for them to comprehend. They could chain the girl, but they could not chain the story. They could burn the body, but they could not burn the belief she embodied. In the end, the fire they lit in the marketplace of Rouen did not consume Joan of Arc. It forged her legend, and in doing so, it burned their own claim to justice into ash.